Hello everyone, I am the Weather Dude. Welcome back, and today we're going to be discussing something we haven't actually discussed in a long time here. As a type of video I haven't done in a while. We're actually going to take our first look, a first forecast for the winter of 2023 to 2024, because it is certainly going to be a very interesting winter with all the factors that are coming together. And of course, we're going to discuss those in this video. And of course, again, I will have my own official self-made forecast provided in the latter part of this video. So of course, be sure to subscribe as well as ring the bell icon so you do not miss a future video, and let's get right into it. All right, so we're going to take a look here first at the summary. So basically, this is from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. If you go, you can go look at their ENSO PowerPoint presentations essentially, and you can see if you scroll towards the bottom, you can actually see they kind of give like a little summary of what they're expecting in terms of the ENSO outlook. So as you can see, they have issued an El Nino advisory because they have observed El Nino conditions. So El Nino is officially in place, right? And that means, of course, the equatorial sea surface temperatures in the Pacific are above average, especially in the central and eastern part. The tropical Pacific atmospheric anomalies are also consistent with an El Nino, and El Nino is anticipated to continue through the northern hemisphere winter with greater than 95% chance of it continuing through the winter and then into 2024. So let's take a look here at the sea surface temperature anomalies. In one of my recent, I believe, tropical videos, I did pull this map up, but you can see we are definitely in that El Nino range. Now, the Bureau of Meteorology, the Australian Bureau of Meteorology, they do define their El Nino and La Nina parameters as 0.8 above and below respectively, as opposed to 0.5 above and below for, again, El Nino and La Nina respectively. But again, the same case can be made here that we are and have been in El Nino since practically the summer. And so essentially anything in this black line area here is like the past analysis. And then we have the latest month-to-date observation here at about 1.5 degrees Celsius above average, which is around that like moderate El Nino zone. That's pretty much where we're in right now. We're kind of in a week heading straight into a moderate El Nino. And a lot of these ensembles kind of forecast us to get into the strong El Nino territory, kind of like a 2015 to 2016 kind of El Nino here, which is very, very high, like closing in on 3 degrees and even exceeding that with some of these ensembles. So the forecast is for it to peak around January of 2024 and then eventually start trending downward as we head towards like February and March. But it's still a pretty strong El Nino is in the forecast here, according to these ensemble models here with the Bureau of Meteorology. If we take a look at the CFS forecast, to me, these seem a lot more accurate, at least in my opinion. If we take a look here, you can kind of see this kind of where we are right now. Again, about 1.5 degrees above average. They're expecting it to kind of tick down, back up, pretty much staying the same, kind of in this 1.5 degree above average area, kind of until December and January. And then again, February and March, and then onward from there, we do kind of start ticking down a little bit, but still remaining in that El Nino range. All right, so next we are going to be taking a look here at our sea surface temperature anomalies. And you can see, again, certainly in the, so basically we have the Nino 1-2 region kind of in here, right? These are kind of like how it's broken down in the Pacific. Then we have Nino 3 kind of right here. And then we have Nino 4, and this is a very approximate drawing here. And we got Nino 4 right there. So this inner zone right here, pretty much halfway between Nino 4, halfway between Nino 3. So this, what I'm shading in black right here, is Nino 3-4. And this zone is what we look at to determine the climatological pattern and their ENSO patterns. And it's pretty fascinating, right? We kind of use that to determine it. And you can see we are steadily above average in the Nino 3-4 region. Again, 1.5 degrees is what is observed. Certainly not as extreme as it is further to the east, where it's over 3 degrees in some areas above average, and certainly not as, it's a little bit weaker, right, in Nino 4 off to the west. But that's just taking a look here at those sea surface temperature anomalies. And also watch what happens in the Gulf of Alaska, all right? Because sometimes when you got these cooler waters like you do right now, maybe we get some troughing in here, and that's why we're seeing those storms potentially coming in, or one is coming in, but more in the future could come in to the west coast of the atmospheric rivers because we got that trough kind of digging down And then who knows, maybe we can see a trough come down here, then ridge, and then maybe another trough over the eastern U.S. Sometimes there's been ridging and troughing. It all depends how the jet stream sets up, but definitely the Gulf of Alaska and off the west coast here of the U.S. is an area to watch in terms of sea surface temperature anomalies as well. So Nino 3.4 index, again, just to give you like a more detailed chart, 1.2 according to Tropical Tidbits, the CDAS, we're sitting at 1.2, and this is pretty much updated like daily, so you kind of call this a little bit more detailed. 1.2 degrees Celsius above average, which is again between that weak and moderate range. And since July, we've been on a slow but certainly steady increase, right? If you look at where we were back in late June, early July, and then where we are now, and you kind of draw a line in between them, it is a steady increase, slowly but surely, of course. All right, so this is like a little GIF here, and kind of showing you the CFS, kind of the sea surface temperature anomalies, kind of like the modeling for it. And personally, I just have a lot of respect for them because modeling sea surface temperatures is very hard. I mean, anomalies, it's not as but modeling sea surface temperatures in general is very difficult for sure. And you might think, well, you know, they don't change that much, but you don't know where they could go, right? A frontal system could sweep in and lower them gradually a little bit, right? Or we could have a lot of heat building in. Maybe the waters warm up a little bit, which there is a lot of lag time. But regardless, these are the CFS ensembles, or CFS V2 here. All right, you can see an average of the last 12 forecasts. So when it starts over, November, December, and I kind of turned this down almost as slow as I could to about a frame per second so we can kind of see it here. But you can see as we head into November, December, and January, those deeper reds are in place. And then did you see what happened there? Once we got towards right here in February and March, they kind of toned down a little bit. So kind of, again, consistent with what the CFS and other models like the Bureau of Meteorology and those have been showing here. So maybe if it does get to a strong El Nino this winter, maybe by later part of the winter and early spring, we kind of tone that down to more of a moderate El Nino. All right, so before we get into my kind of self-made forecast here, we're going to take a look here at what a typical El Nino looks like. All right, so usually we have the polar jet coming in some fashion, right, into the east. Sometimes the trough's lower here. Sometimes it kind of stays up in Canada. But typically speaking, it is a little bit warmer across the north because of that polar jet kind of coming down, like it ridges over here and then maybe troughs a little bit in the east, but it's staying over the northern central United States, and that's causing it to be warmer there. And it's going to cause it to be drier, of course, in parts of the Midwest, United States, kind of like the Tennessee Valley, if you will, like Chicago, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Nashville, some major cities in there, St. Louis, of course. Right? And that could again cause that to be drier. And the reason for that is they're kind of far away from this Pacific jet, which is going to keep the southwest, the south, and southeast primarily wet and cool. And honestly, for this drier area, it should be kind of more up here, not so much including like the southern states, and it kind of spills over there. The graph kind of overlays. But I would say more of this, anywhere south of this black line, I would say is like the wetter and cooler area. Because that's where it's going to be more influenced by that extended Pacific jet stream bringing cool, kind of like, like San Francisco, kind of like, 50s, 60s, wet and cool kind of. That's the kind of vibe that the Pacific jet kind of brings here. Right, pretty wet and cool. But of course, when it gets cold enough, of course, we could certainly see some snow. Certainly, if we got the polar jet to come down and the Pacific jet to kind of get a low pressure system, that would of course be ideal for southern snow. But again, this is just a typical look of what a typical El Nino looks like. All right, so now what I've done here, so NOAA, they on their climate division page, they kind of have like a thing where you can make maps and to kind of see in past history what has happened. You could put in whatever years you want. It's a pretty nice tool. I've used it. I'm pretty sure I've used it for like the past 3 years at this point for my seasonal forecast. Now this isn't my forecast, but what this is showing us. So I've inputted certain years from the 09 and 10 winter all the way back to the 57, 58 winter. You can see all the years I've inputted here. These are all years that we have had moderate El Ninos similar to the one we're in right now and probably will hold through this winter. So basically what this is saying is in a moderate El Nino, right? What could happen? Now, I didn't put the 15 to 16 winter in here, and there are others I could have put in because those resembled strong El Ninos. And if we get to the point where that's becoming likely, that of course we will certainly change this map to include the stronger El Ninos to get a better look at what we've seen, right, with strong El Ninos in the past. But for right now, looks like a borderline moderate to strong El Nino, right, in between there, and that's the ones I've been putting here. So typically, what has happened is the Midwest and even actually parts of the South have been typically drier, right? And it does kind of spill a little bit into the South, right? Maybe like Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama, but the northern parts of the states, right? And then the coastal parts, so like the East, for example, the East Coast, which you'll note in one of my maps later, the East Coast, the Southeast Coast, right? The Gulf Coast, and then into the Southwest have all been typically wetter than average. But of course, what really stands out here have been pretty far above average, especially in the Gulf and Southeast coasts, is where we've really been, above average with the precip. And it's a pretty sharp divide because you got decently, like we're far back on the graph here in terms of the drier air for like Indiana and Ohio and Kentucky. That drier anomalies there really stick out, and then we got the wetter anomalies, like the above average precipitation that really sticks out. So it's kind of like a sharp wedge, a sharp divide here between the Midwest and the Southeast. Also, do know in the Northwest it is typically drier. Again, this is just typically what's happened in the past during these winters. So could even see some slightly less mountain snow, but again, I'm already starting to spoil the map, so I won't do that quite just yet. So that's a look again at the precipitation, and of course it's kind of like a toss up, right? Average precipitation there for kind of like pretty much the Central Plains, kind of like between from North Dakota down to Oklahoma. All right, now what do the temperatures usually look like? Now I actually found this kind of interesting, right? Because the temperatures, typically speaking, right, are below average, and actually it was by quite a bit. So much so that if you noticed on the intervals almost spoiled that on the last one, you can kind of see here, 3. I went from 3 below average to 3 inches above average, and then I kind of turned up the intervals from 5 degrees below average to 5 degrees above average because there was so much dark blue dominating the southeast that like you couldn't actually tell. So I actually did go ahead and change the intervals here. All right, so if we take a look, you can see the southeast, all right, typically speaking, between 3 and 4 degrees Fahrenheit below average as like an average of all these winters. So that is pretty significant here. So the southeast has been quite cool when it comes to these moderate El Ninos, right? Kind of moderate to borderline strong, but not quite. The northeast, like the East Coast, while not as cool as the southeast, I mean cool in temperature wise, but they are still below average nonetheless. Same goes for the southwest, right? Not as cold as the southeast typically, but still below average. Really, nowhere is above average, which is what I found kind of weird. I mean, there are a couple counties. I mean, in the Northern Plains and like the UP of Michigan, half of it. But typically speaking, your average temperatures are kind of in this region here. If let's put it this way, if the best chance to have that warm air is still in this zone here, wherever you see that kind of white and a couple specks of yellow. So temperatures typically, because you got to remember, it still does get cold across the north, right? Although it could still get warmer than average, even though it's still technically speaking cold. All right, without further ado, let's get into it here with the precipitation forecast. I almost spoiled it. You guys might have even seen me change maps because on Google Slides, when you kind of click the mouse, it just changes the map, so it kind of goes to the next slide. So I kind of have to be aware of that. But anyway, if we look at the precipitation forecast, again, this is kind of just my first thoughts on the precipitation for winter of 23 into 24. If we look here, again, the East Coast, Southeast, Gulf Coast, off to the Southwest. And again, depending on how strong the El Nino is, I actually might expand this light green up to the north a little bit to include like maybe San Francisco, Reno's, maybe as far north as Salt Lake City, Las Vegas, of course. All depending on, because typically in stronger El Ninos, the above average precipitation zone is suppressed a little bit to the south, whereas in weaker or more moderate El Ninos, it's more to the north. All depends, so that we'll have to watch. But my higher confidence area, aka the area that could be further above average, right, is kind of sitting here in the southeast and into the Gulf Coast, right? And this is also kind of like, again, you could look at this as, yes, a darker green could be a further departure above average, but I like to look at this as like you have a better chance of being above average in your precipitation if you're in a darker color for green, and then for, of course, the darker browns mean like you have a better chance of being below average in precipitation. Speaking of which, let's hop on up here to the north, and you can see slightly below average precipitation for the northwest, for the northern plains, and the Midwest. But of course, the Midwest and parts of the Northwest, of course, are your typically your areas that do see that below average precipitation in El Ninos. Have more of a history of it, so that's where your below average areas, right? Your moderately below average kind of comes in here. So that's a look again at the precipitation forecast. If we take a look here at the temperature forecast, again, it doesn't really look much like the precipitation forecast. It kind of does, right? Again, the East Coast, Southeast, and then the Gulf Coast and the Southwest, both slightly below average temperatures. Again, you kind of have that Pacific jet kind of coming through here, keeping the South cool, right? It's gonna get, again, that's where that cool air comes from. And then we have the polar jet that kind of comes through and keeps, again, it doesn't dip down as far as, say, as in like an ENSO neutral or weak El Nino, but it still can dive down to the south and maybe provide the East Coast some cooler air. So that's where that part of the that's where this part of the slightly below average kind of extends up the East Coast. That's kind of the reason why. But again, higher confidence, especially areas like the Southeast and the Gulf Coast. Again, same places where we had the higher confidence of above average precipitation. We have the above average, or same areas that we have the above average precipitation with the below average temperatures, excuse me. Now, if we look here, again, you might be alarmed like, oh, we're going to have a heat wave in the north, above average. That's not what that means. Again, I'll explain it especially on my next map because it might throw some people off. But we could have some slightly above average temperatures, especially in, again, the north central and then into the northwest with the Dakotas and Montana. Of course, because this area, I have a little bit of higher confidence because typically we have the kind of the jet stream kind of ridges up this way, right? So where that ridge is highest, is usually where we see like the warmest, quote unquote, departures from average, where we get that jet stream, the really kind of ridge. So that's where we're looking at there. So again, higher confidence in this zone that could be like moderately above average. All right, now my overall forecast, my first time doing this in a while, but here we go. The overall forecast for winter 23-24. Again, as with all my other maps, please do expect this to change. Like, I'm not even gonna say it could. It probably will change. So definitely keep it here for updates on this season over the next, especially month or two. But here we go. We're gonna kind of work here. We'll work from east to west, right? I don't remember how I used to do it, but we will work from east to west. Maybe we'll change it up. If we take a look at the East Coast, kind of starting off strong here, we could have some coastal storms and nor'easters. All right, these are pretty prevalent, excuse me, with El Ninos. I mean, if you remember again that strong El Nino, even though it was a really strong El Nino in 2015 to 16 winter, we had Winter Storm Jonas. That was a blockbuster. All right. Also, 2009 to 2010, we had our fair share of snowstorms come through here, Midwest and the East. So El Ninos still do provide, quite a punch. So we could see some of these coastal storms and nor'easters, especially because if we have the polar jet coming down here, we got a strong extended Pacific jet. If they come really close to or even collide with each other, that's how a low pressure forms, and they could kind of come up the East Coast like this. So that's what we're going to be watching for this winter. So that's why we have those coastal storms and nor'easters zoned for the East. And see, now I can click all I want because now there's no next slide. But if we take a look here, a little bit inland, we could have, of course, lake effect snow. Now, yes, there could be below average precipitation, especially maybe not so much in the interior Northeast, maybe more of the Midwest, but we will have some warmer air that could potentially move over, or we could have warmer air, right, causing the lakes to warm up. And then if we do get some cold shots like we could, right, that could turn up the lake effect snow potentially. So there is still a decent probability that we could have some lake effect snow. All right, let's work to the wintry mix. So this is just going to be like essentially the battle zone, just all of it. Sleet, freezing rain, snow. Anywhere in this pink extends from New Mexico all the way to the Virginias, the Appalachian Mountains, and the Smoky Mountains. Pretty much right through the middle there. We're going to have a wintry mix that could be in place. If we look here at the wet and cool zone, again, typically with El Ninos, wetter and cooler. All right. Probably not like northern tier kind of cold, but it will be, kind of like that damp, cool rain. And if it does get really cold, we could even see some little bit of snow kind of creep down to this region. But typically, the snow will be held off to the wintry mix zone. But again, these boundaries will be moving around, of course. Slightly warmer and drier. Now here we go. Right? I do not mean it's going to be like warmer, say, or as warm than the south, but slightly warmer and slightly drier. And slightly warmer and slightly drier is what that says. Compared to normal. Okay, and then the orange, which I'll explain to in a sec, is warmer and drier than normal. So again, slightly, we could still see some polar vortex, some cold blasts, right? Of course, we do have that area that says cold shots right here, right? But we still will have cold blasts, probably more significant than the ones in blue in those areas, but it will still be slightly warmer and drier than average overall. Slightly less mountain snow, like I was explaining earlier. Anyone is in this black shade here, kind of for the Rocky Mountains. Yeah, looking like slightly less just because of the warmer and the drier air, but again, we will still have mountain snow, just slightly less of it. Warm and dry. So this is kind of building off again of the yellow zone, except I think there's higher confidence that it'll probably be warmer and drier, and it probably will be further. It'll probably be the departures will be further from normal, right? So it'll probably be warmer and drier here than it will be in the northern tier. And then finally, we have stormy and slightly cooler again from that Pacific jet. Really keep coming in to the west here, and it will deliver some rain and storms, of course, for the southwest and those mountains areas. Could see some mountain snow there still as well. But yeah, that was my overall forecast for winter of 2023 into 2024, my first one. All right, so thank you guys so much for watching. I know that again, that was the first time in a while that I've done the kind of the seasonal forecast, but I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys enjoyed like the new maps and everything. I definitely hope to provide more of these in the future. This was, of course, very fun to make, and it's fun to talk about the winter finally. I know a lot of us just want to. Some of us still enjoy summer, but getting out of hurricane season is also very nice, and maybe enjoying some colder weather. So we will see how the winter and of course the autumn shape out, and we'll be giving a forecast on those in the future as well. So be sure to stick around for more, and thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video.